today I live in a place where there's pain, there's joy, there's great sadness, there's great happiness, there's all of the emotions given to us. I am living in and feeling, not being driven by emotion, but allowing myself to experience it and then trusting God that gave me all those things. And that's what freedom is for me.
Well, good evening, Harvest. How are you? Excellent. So glad that you're here. Let me just say for a second, because I didn't have a chance to say it this morning, but I want to just say thank you so much to Cliff Ritter for being here. He's one of the most amazing, caring pastors, literally. Like, he has that in his title, so he really has to be. But of our 12 pastors, we have a couple that really focus on the caring ministry of this church. And so he's not always here where you can see him, but he is always here supporting this entire church. And so it is a huge blessing to have him. So thank you. Thank you so much. So, very excited about tonight. So what tonight is going to look like. I know that some of you weren't here this morning, so I want to kind of catch you up about what we talked about this morning in our series, Lost Art of Letting Go. But what we're going to do is actually just kind of continue a conversation that we began this morning. So, all right, let me do the catch up. So in our series, Lost Art of Letting Go, we're looking at things that are in our lives that we need to literally let go of as we are moving in this Lenten series from the journey to the cross for resurrection. There are things in our lives that weigh us down. And so we need to be able to let those go so that God can do the work that he needs to in our lives so that we can experience the true and the new life that he gives that we see through the resurrection of Jesus. And we've been looking at letting go of our past, letting go of regret, letting go of hurt, letting go of brokenness. And this morning I said, these are all things that are kind of easy for us to relate to. Yeah, I had that in my life. I could kind of see it. But today we wanted to talk about this idea of lost art of letting go of addiction. And that's a scary word, that word addiction. And the thought was, when I first saw that, I thought, wow, I'm not sure how many people this will really relate to, because, how many of us are diagnosed being addicts. But as I looked into it, it has really opened up my heart and had conversations with Alison. I saw this core thread in those who have who know that they suffer and they have an addiction, and the rest of us who think we don't, but we do, because the core of this is this idea of not feeling okay with ourselves, not feeling okay or satisfied or fulfilled with our life. And so because we don't, we think something is missing. We think there's this hole that we go and we seek out things to fill that hole. And when we are not seeking out things of God, those things can become very detrimental to our life. Instead of helping us, they hurt us. We also, as humans, have this innate desire to escape. When things don't feel good, we look for things to numb our life. And they can be drugs, they can be alcohol, they can be pornography, they can be, gambling, or they can be other things that are more socially acceptable addictions, like just go out and spending. You're just buying something because it gives you a temporary high, or, eating food. And so anyway, this whole idea of addiction seemed like kind of a scary topic, but incredibly freeing once we got into this conversation. And I love, because Alison was able to share her story, and we filmed it this morning, and so they got to hear a 3-minute version of your entire life. 3 minutes or less. But tonight, I want us to talk a little further, and I want you to really be open to be able to open up. Because I think, we always talk about how important community is, to walk alongside each other, to open up our lives to one another, because not only can we encourage one another, but we can learn from one another. And God meant for us to not only be in relationship with him, but with others. And so if we keep our lives hidden, we're missing out on what God really created. So this morning we really talked about sort of these steps of when we recognize that we are filling the hole with something we're not supposed to, that we need to look up, which means, look away from that thing that we're substituting in, and look at ourselves and say, what is it that I'm trying to escape? What is it that I'm trying to numb? We need to open up. We need to have those relationships, and we need to change up. We need to switch the dependency from that substance or that person or that thing to God. And I love, all the books and stuff that go, 3 steps to a new you, right? I mean, like it's that easy, but it's not that easy, but it's a place to start. So anyway, now everybody is caught up, so you didn't even have to come this morning for an hour. You could just came here for 5 minutes, and I told you. But what I really just want this time to be is to give you an opportunity, and really for us to just have a conversation and share your experience in your life, and then just where you've seen God work. So why don't you just invite us into your life and kind of tell us your story.
Okay.
By the way, this is Alison Broussard. And she's the one that sings so beautifully up here all the time.
Do you want the 3-minute version?
No, man, we got time. I'm not even hungry, so I'm good for a while.
That's awesome. I'm a little hungry.
Are you? All right, well, maybe if we can get this done in a half hour, we're good?
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll try. I think a couple things, we were talking about trying to fill yourself with things, I think for me, and I can speak to my own experience, that's what the beauty of this is this is my experience. I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I know for me, in my life, I was always looking for a solution. I was always looking for an answer, and if that was if I was uncomfortable, then I was going to look for a solution for that, or if I was scared, I was going to look for a solution for that. And so I think for me, just instead of this, right or wrong, it's more about, as human beings, we are created to look for something, a solution, something that works. And I know in the video, I didn't realize until I looked back at it, but I was like, gosh, you say insufficient a lot.
But I love that word, though. I told you that really inspired when I sat and heard your story. I thought, man, that was such a good word. I liked it.
Yeah, and so I think for me, growing up in the church, I came from just a beautiful Christian family. My mom and dad are both believers. I have a brother and a sister, and we kind of had one of those lives where we lived out in the country, and, it was really a good life. I just remember, my kids have gone to church more than most kids, I would say, because they've been to 3 services.
What happens when... you work at the church.
Exactly. But growing up in the church, you have a lot, especially when you go every Sunday, and you're I think I was the only kid that was in church after prom. Or did anyone else go to church after prom night?
Wow, even I didn't go to church after I'm sorry.
So things like that, we did church. My parents were very involved, and, they sang in the choir, and they were on committees and did all these things, and so church was a big part of our lives. But for me, for some reason, and I would say, of course I did Sunday school and kind of grew up in that, but at some point, it just wasn't, it just didn't make sense for my life, and I kept thinking, where am I going to see someone that has something that I want? Because what would happen is, actually, a lot of people were living these lives that, you would think you'd want, as far as they were thriving and they were doing really good, but there was no real connection in that. I know for me, and I'm really gonna divulge a little bit of information, but like when I was growing up, we would drive to church and fight the entire way to church.
You're the only family ever.
And then as soon as we got there, my dad, God love him, would jab me in the back and tell me to straighten up. And I'd have to walk into church like that. Like, I mean, I was like, smile. What are you talking about? You just jabbed me. And I love him. He's so great. I don't know if this is being filmed, but I'm super scared right now.
That's all right. I'm sending him the link to it right now.
My dad is awesome, but he jabbed me in the back. And so that was just like, where did we come up with that idea that you got to come to church with this face? And of course, we were in our Sunday best. That was back when you did your Sunday best.
Right. I know. We're in sandals. I love it.
It's just different, right? You know, you'd come and you'd bring your absolute best. And so when people asked you how you were doing, I'm like, I couldn't tell them that I just got jabbed in the back. That wasn't acceptable. And you know what? I'm not really talking about jabbed in the back, but I'm talking about when I was struggling. I was really struggling. So I grew up in this environment. I know when I went to college, I mentioned in the video, which I'll tell you guys, like I joined a sorority, and I really fought this whole idea of, I really fought to be cool. I really struggled with wanting these people's lives that I thought had it all together, and really chased after that. Well, I had this group of sweet girls that would always ask me like, hey, do you want to come do this Bible study with us? And for some reason, again, because of what I grew up with, it wasn't sufficient. I wasn't interested in that. And so I kind of turned in another direction, and I just began, drinking and smoking and, just hanging out with these people that probably, I don't know that they cared much about me, but it was just this thing that you did. So I went to this event. It was our first formal event. And, I put myself in a position to be hurt. And why I say that is I did some things that made it unsafe for me. It doesn't mean that what happened to me should have happened to me. It's just like if somebody, doesn't completely cover up and they're, wearing clothing that's maybe inappropriate down a dark alley, that doesn't mean that anything should happen to them. But the truth is that sometimes things do. And so I put myself in a position and I was hurt. That night I remember, or that next morning I remember everything changed for me. I know that was a traumatic event in my life. And so I believe that night, whatever small belief system that I had, whatever string of hope that there was something good kind of broke. Maybe it just severed. Maybe it didn't completely break. I don't know that it did, but it was, something broke in me. And it just changed the way that I began to live my life. And I completely fell away from the church. I think for me, again, I just was numbing myself, trying to shut off that feeling of being wrong, of making the mistakes that I did. And what's really interesting is that that mistake led to the next mistake that led to the next mistake, and just a life of regret and shame and, all those things that don't make for a really happy, positive life.
So it sounds like there was sort of the traumatic moment that sort of tipped the scale for you, but then after that, then it was a continual. Do you think that for other people that struggle, whether it's alcohol or drugs or something else, do you think that is a typical progression? Like, is there kind of that tipping point moment in many people's lives, or does it gradually just sort of take hold of you?
Yeah, that's a great point. So I do think I think that addiction comes from so many different things that we really can't pinpoint it on one thing. But I clearly, because I have in my family line some addiction, clearly had the gene, they talk about that. There are some people that are wired differently, and, we don't know what it takes. We really don't know what it takes, but at some point, it's like playing with fire. Sometimes you don't get burned, and sometimes you get burned.
When did you realize that alcohol had taken over and had become a problem in your life?
So I think it was, you know what's interesting is I think that for those of you that know people that struggle with addiction or alcoholism, drug addiction, whatever, the weird thing is that we try to not be that person. We try to not struggle. We try to not be the addict. And so we fight against it for so long that often it, I think we knew a lot before we actually would admit. I think family members, you see it, it's just these patterns. And there are some people that will say things like, well, I never knew. And that can happen too. It's such a mystery how addiction actually happens. But for me, the interesting thing is I would sit around with these girls drinking, and we would talk about the problem, that we had a problem. And we'd be drinking, talking about, I think you should get help. I think you should get help. Like, I think we should all get help. Like, somebody needs to get help. Do you need to get help? I think I need to get help. And you're just, it's like, but then the next day, you're not drinking, and you're like, I'm just going to ignore what we said last night. You know what I'm saying? You just, because you feel better. It's like when you're in the midst of it and you're feeling bad, and that's the struggle with a lot of alcoholics is the minute we feel better, we're like, I got this, I'm good. Like, I'm good, right? I did that, and we fight against it for so long. So when did you know? I think we knew a lot sooner than we really gave on or let on. Plus, I really do, our family and our friends know a lot sooner.
Yeah, because they can see it.
Yeah, just the behavior and the patterns. But it's the elephant in the room. And really nobody, it's a hard thing to talk about. It's a really hard thing to talk about.
Right. Well, and an addiction, no matter what it is, the very fact that you brought up the family and friends, it affects more than the person. It is with that person that has the problem or the addiction, but it has the wave, it has the effect of the family, the friends, anyone who's in it. And so you struggled for how long until you got to the point where you got help?
I'll answer that, but real quick, you said, it's family thing. It is a family disease. This is what I do know. 1 in 7 is the national average. 1 in 7 are afflicted with addiction. The other 6 are dealing with that one. So it's very much a family thing. It doesn't just affect the addicted individual. It affects anybody that has any touch point with you, It just does. So, sorry, what did you ask me? I just had to get that in there. I don't know.
I love that. Okay, so how long did you struggle? How long did you struggle with alcohol until that point when you got help?
So I would say a good 8 years. So I got, this is the funny thing. I don't know if any of your mothers give you books about life and how to live life. But y'all, I have this book, and I wish I knew the name of it because it was really good. It was all about King Solomon. I think it was King Solomon. And how, everything under the sun, that whole thing.
Ecclesiastes.
Yes.
And yep.
Yes. I wish I knew
the name of it. I'm so glad I got that right.
Sorry. But this is what's funny is after I'd gotten sober a year, so I'd been sober a year. I got sober in 1999, in May 14th, 99.
Awesome.
Yeah. I went to go pull off something on a very high shelf. Y'all, this book came and hit me square in the head. I was like, I think my mom planted it there. Like, I think she did it, She was always like giving me a book, and I was like, yeah, Mom, I'll read that like later. I can't do that right now. I'm just so busy, and I'm reading my big book and all this stuff. Anyways, but it was so funny because every time like a book comes and hits me in the head, I then have to read it. I feel like that was a sign.
I did say this morning that God will use anything and everything. He will hit you in the head with a book to get your attention.
Yeah. And that book was so good and enlightening. Again, I can't remember the name of it, but there's been so many. there's so much good stuff out there. I mean, the Big Book being one of them. But, again, the Big Book also, sorry, I'm going off on a tangent real quick, but
go right ahead.
The Big Book is not a book you will ever go to Barnes and Noble and be like, oh, this looks really cool. I'm going to pick this one off the shelf and read it. It usually is a book that will be like handed to you in jail or in a 12-step meeting or, whatever. It's just, but the really cool thing is that book is one man's account of how he came back. And I say back because I think we were always there in the beginning, right?
Yeah.
But this is about coming back and really getting to know who the God of the universe is. I know that, I'll just share with you, I left the church. I really did. I walked away in college. I said, yeah, that's just not going to work for me. And so for a long time, I know I ended up getting married, and I still kind of carried this, I'm a Christian. I acknowledged that. I said that, but I really was very far from it. So I think I was just doing it kind of as a cultural thing,
You believed in God, but you weren't a follower of God.
Right.
Yeah.
I would say that. Yeah. I just identified as a Christian because I grew up in a Christian home. Well, the interesting thing is that it is the work that I did in the 12 steps, which, by the way, comes from the spiritual principles in the Bible. Like, that's how they pulled those, is from that, But doing that work led me back to the church. And I will say, it did it through, the reason I came back to the church, I'm just gonna be honest with y'all, was because of my kiddos. I needed nursery. I needed 1 hour.
I'm telling you what,
uninterrupted
nursery
time.
And children's ministry is so incredibly important to the church. I am not kidding.
It's an outreach for sure.
Not kidding. It really
sure,
is. It's a true ministry.
But what's interesting is,
you needed free babysitting.
I did. I came for that, but I stayed, anyways. So I'm always thankful to my kids because they really did bring me back to church. You hear that. The kids often bring adults back to the church. So thanks, Lauren and Taylor. I don't know where Taylor is. But what's interesting in that is I remember I would sneak into the back because I was like, gosh, I'm here. I should go to service. And they had this new service that, this is in San Antonio. They had this new service that was real dark. And I was like, I could sneak back into this gym.
Right.
That was like so non-traditional. I was like, yeah, like I'm never going back to the traditional whatever.
Right.
I actually love traditional today. I love the big choir and the big, all that stuff. I do love it. But I remember seeing this worship leader on the stage and I felt like this, oh my gosh, what is this? What is this? I've never ever experienced church like this.
Yeah.
Anyways, I go off on tangents. I'm so sorry.
No, you're doing great because I really wanted you to tell that story. So you got married you were struggling with alcohol even through that. You had children. You found free babysitting at the church, which is, that should be like a hashtag or something. I don't know. And then you've snuck into the back of a service. And tell me about that story, because we talked about this before, about how someone heard you sing.
Oh, yeah. So it's really interesting the way that came about. Like I did choir, in high school or whatever. But yeah, so I'm standing in the back and I am connecting with this girl, or actually with God, I'm sure. But I was singing this song that this girl's singing. And this usher walked by and he looked at me, stopped right there in the midst of the song. And he was like, you have a great voice. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed. Like, I was just like, I'll never sing again. I'm never singing again. So after the service, he grabbed me and he took me to this guy that was like, led the, team and brought in different singers. And so he was like, I need you to know this girl, whatever. So I think I tried out and made it. And it was so funny. The early days were super tough, but good, but good. And then I think maybe a year later, they brought in this amazing worship leader. And it was just
what was his name?
Yeah, his name was Mark Swayze. They brought him in.
I've heard of him. I think he's pretty good.
This is what's funny though, I will tell you this. So he sent us all home. He said, thanks, bye. Starting a new team. He was very nice about it though, because that guy's the nicest. So he sent every one of the worship, anybody that had anything to do with the worship team, he sent home in a really nice way. But he was just starting fresh. He was going to have interviews and do all this stuff and start a team. And I kind of walked away with my tail between my legs, like, what was that? That hurt so bad, whatever. And a couple weeks later, he called me and he's like, hey, just thinking, you want to sing with me? And I was like so excited. I couldn't believe it. I honestly couldn't believe it. And we've been singing ever since. So about 13 years, something like that.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Exactly.
Really
right?
cool.
Right? So I realized we jumped over a part, and we should probably say that before you found your way back onto the stage where you were leading worship, you actually went into a treatment center.
So I did, and that is an important part because I know a lot of times in the church, we have this idea of like for addicts and alcoholics and people that struggle with mental illness, like, just pray harder. And I don't disagree with praying. I don't. There's not a part of me that disagrees with that. But at some point, there's also action that may need to be taken in the form of getting professional help.
Yeah.
What happens again with addiction, because it's so unknown, we don't know when the exact time that someone's going to get, pulled into something that is bigger than they are and they cannot escape it. Yeah. I mean, there are times, and I know that I experienced that when I had to call my mom. It was not a call I wanted to make. When I called her, it was like everything against me to even make that call. And so, and it was just to say, hey, I need help. And that's when she said, I've been praying for you. But yeah, treatment. So I went into an IOP. It was an intensive outpatient treatment. I didn't go to inpatient. Probably could have really benefited from that, but I didn't. I went later when I worked for one. so that was good for me. But I did realize that, hey, this is a lifelong journey. Yeah. I got connected to some 12-step meetings and just support groups and, therapy and things like that to begin to work through.
So now that you can look back, where can you identify God's hand, like, other than the book falling on your head, right? Like, where else can you look back and go, oh my gosh, that was God reaching out and calling me to him. This was help that he put in my path.
Yeah. So I did, my first 12-step meeting was a meeting with, it was an open group, and it should have been men and women, but it was all older men. It was in Dallas, or near Dallas, in a place called Louisville. And the really interesting thing is that I went there, but I didn't necessarily want it. I didn't want what they had, because I'm in my 20s, and it does not to say that they didn't have good recovery, but that was not good for me. Mm-hmm. So I went for a year. My husband kept encouraging me to continue to go. So I went to those meetings, I think, for about a year. And at some point I was like, I cannot do this anymore. Well, I kind of went into a funk. And so for 3 years after that, I struggled immensely. I even landed myself in a psych ward of a hospital because I had suicidal ideations. There was a bunch of medication changes and things like that, because that was just a part of my journey at that point. Yeah. And right after I got out of the hospital, for whatever reason, these women came to me. I don't even know that they knew my struggle, but they said, hey, we want to talk to you about kind of joining a group or coming together in a group and working through the 12 steps. And I was like, what is happening? Wow. Like, I knew them, but I didn't really know that they all shared that kind of story. Yeah. And so we began to work through the big book. We had our Bibles. We had some, certain verses that we read through. We read through the Serenity Prayer, the third step prayer, like all this kind of stuff. And so it was like a little little meeting. Wow. And it was, but it was just these women, and it was closed. It was just us. Mm-hmm. But we worked like I had never worked before, and it changed my life. And so that, I can't remember how it formed. Like, honestly, I think I'm, missing some memories in there, but it came together. Yeah. And that is what really changed my life, because these women, there's the power of really connecting. Like, if anybody ever struggles and is looking for a group, don't just go to one. You got to go to that group a couple times. If that doesn't work, then go to another group. Hear me when I say, I don't know what that looks like, but I know you got to put your foot to the pavement and begin to look for these answers.
And I love the fact that even as you're telling the story, that one, you can see that it's not a straight line. It's a an even progression, and
it was a bumpy road.
Right, and that's, I think that is so important, not only for people who struggle, but those of us who love someone who struggles. When we go, they're getting so much better, and then it's like, no, but that's okay, because that's how the journey goes. It is circuitous route. Right?
And I'll tell you too, like, y'all, I had back surgery after I got sober, which is a very hard thing to go through. And I really do kind of compare my back surgery to like recovery. Because even that, like the fact that somebody said, hey, at some point you're gonna feel better, but it took a very long time to get better. And I would have 2 really good days and then 1 bad day. Yeah. And then, you'd go forward again and back. So, I mean, we've got these physical bodies, and then we've got these, the mental piece of it, and then the spiritual piece, which is all over the top of both of those. So
there's one story I definitely want you to be able to share. As you look at the ways that God, not only worked in your life, but has worked in other people's life. Can you tell the story about the song that we're gonna hear afterwards?
Yes, I will. So after I had been sober for 10 years, I went to work at a great treatment center that was in the hill country. I lived in Kerrville, and so I had been singing with Mark for a few years. He had recorded an album. Anyways, I'll put that to the side. So this therapist that I love that works there, she worked with young adults, or actually, it's collegiate age. And she told this one collegiate girl who was there, this girl went to Baylor, and she was a musician. And she was like, hey, you got to go talk to my friend Alison. I need you to go talk with her. She's a musician. So she comes in and sits down and starts talking with me. And she's like, so I hear you're a musician. And I was like, I mean, okay, yeah. And then she said, so what band are you in? And I was like, oh no, you will not have heard of us. There's no way on earth that you will have heard of us. And she was like, well, just tell, like, okay, well, what's the name of it? I mean, now I just want to know the name of it. And I was like, well, I just sing with this guy named Mark Swayze. Jaw drops. She's like, he wrote a song called Satisfied. She started bawling. She's like, that's why I'm here. I listened to this song. A friend of mine from Baylor gave me his CD. I listened to Satisfy, turned it off, picked up the phone, called my parents, and said I need to go to treatment. And I was like, this is not possible. Like, there's no way this is possible. Anyway, so for me, it's one of those stories where I'll hold on to that for the rest of my life. It's like, I'm sure, without a shadow of a doubt, that was something God needed me to see.
Yeah, I love when God opens up the little doors or the windows so that we can see the ways that he's working, because he's working all the time. He's doing so many things that we don't even have a clue. But when he allows us to see a glimpse of it, it is so great. Okay, so God has allowed you and has brought you to a place to co-found a really important ministry. I want you to tell us about that.
Yeah, so Mosaics of Mercy, and I have some really sweet women that partner with me. Sherry and Paige are here tonight. We have another lady named Amy, and then another one, Kathleen. And so this group formed because I'm standing on the stage up here, right? And I'm very open and honest about my struggles. And so people would come and talk to me and say, hey, can we have coffee? I'd love to talk to you about that. And the stories just started pouring out. And I was like, gosh, do you know her? Because y'all have the same story. And I really wasn't divulging all the information, but I was just like, how do these people not know each other? And so at some point we decided to all go to lunch, and there were some other sweet people in this congregation that were at that lunch. And so we went to lunch and we shared our stories. And I'm telling you, I did not form this ministry, but because of that conversation, the weird thing is that ministry just like, just like popped out.
Almost like God kind of brought you all together and
I don't think
amazing.
Our lunch was ever, and it was never an idea like, oh, hey, let's start a ministry. Whoever says that? I don't know. Anybody? But And Amy she had done these hearts for cancer. She was a breast cancer survivor. And so she was going to do a session of these hearts with a cancer group. And we were like, wait a second, tell us about those hearts. What are you talking about? So she shared with us, and we were just kind of like, oh my gosh, like that clearly is a design for this thing. We'd love to let people make these hearts, talk about brokenness, things like that. So again, I mean, it was just like conversation after conversation. And all of a sudden, a year later, we're like in full-fledged ministry, whatever you call that. I don't know. So the ministry, though, is 3-part. We do make these hearts. We do sessions where people can come make the hearts. It's super healing. It's an amazing session where you get to really like think about your brokenness, talk about your brokenness, and then make a mosaic heart out of broken pieces. And these go to people that are struggling with mental illness and addiction. I know in the last 6 months, we've given out 450.
Wow.
Given out. So we sell them as well to, raise funds for the ministry. Another piece that we do is so it's cultivate, and this is cultivating, just trying to get the conversations flowing around mental illness and addiction so it's not so scary, because it is scary. Yeah. Just like cancer was scary years ago, and today we can talk about it pretty freely. We're trying to do that with mental illness and addiction. But also an educate piece. So we go into churches or organizations or groups and help educate them about mental illness and addiction. And then navigate. We also help people find resources, all kinds of things that can be helpful. We've got books on our website. We've got, just those books that my mom gave me are all there. They're all on the website. No,
yay, Mom.
Just a collection of like things that have had a great impact in our lives. And all of us had that common thread of like mental illness struggles or addiction struggles or, family members that struggle or whatever. It didn't matter. It was just, we knew there was a common bond.
Well, I absolutely love the hearts. I love the idea that, here we're all broken. I mean, none of us are perfect, right? We talked about that this morning. And that it doesn't matter what your rough edges are from, whether it's addiction or decisions or life circumstances or whatever. No matter where your life has become broken, that God, in his infinite wisdom and infinite mystery, has the power to take your life and to make something beautiful of it and useful. And so like tonight is I feel like just maybe the beginning of a conversation. Maybe tonight someone is sitting here going, you know what? It's not just me. It's not. Or, I see that in my loved one or my spouse that I don't even know what to do with anymore, right? So tonight, as we just continue this time of worship, what I want us to do is open up an opportunity for us to all be part of what God is doing. And the band is gonna come up and start singing, but we have sort of 3 different things. One, we have hearts on the stage, and these are hearts that will eventually be packaged together and be given to someone. But every heart is prayed over, right?
Yeah, every heart is prayed over.
So what I want to invite all of us to do is to take part in coming up and taking a heart and just praying, knowing that someone who feels broken, someone who is struggling, is going to have that heart be placed in his or her hands. And if this has ever happened to you, if something that is prayed over is handed to you, God's power is in that. And there is just, you can't even describe it, but you know that there is power in that. So we have an opportunity to pray over hearts that will go to someone who's struggling. We also have larger hearts in both of our prayer nooks where you have an opportunity to pick up a broken piece and place it on this heart. These hearts are going to be part of the mosaics of Mercy Ministry. And I think there's something really healing and cathartic of just being able to hold a broken piece and go, yeah, that's me. And you know what, in God's love, he takes me and he makes me part of this beautiful picture that he creates. And then we're also aware that there are probably some people who are going, you know what, that's me. You are telling your story, but that's my story. Well, this team that you're talking about is here. And so if you want someone to pray for you, then as you're up here and you're praying, if you just put your hands up, that's kind of the standard practice here is if your hands are open, it means you would really like someone to pray for you. And one thing I didn't say is, I do love how in the video you talked about your mom, praying for you for so long. And you recognize later that that was the boldest and most beautiful prayer that could be prayed for. And I just think that there are some of us here who have someone who needs us to pray for them. That maybe it's your daughter, maybe it's your son, maybe it's your spouse, maybe it's, someone, your best friend, and they need you to be on your knees, praying boldly and beautiful prayers that God would continue to, because we know God will continue to pursue them, but that they would stop and they would hear God's calling on their life. And so we're gonna hear some songs, and this is our time to come forward and to take part in the mosaics of Mercy ministry. And I'm so grateful and proud to say that you're my friend, and for you to be able to open up your heart, and for us to see God's beauty from you. You're just incredible.
Thank you all for letting me share. Thank you.